Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy and in today's video we are drawing some dog eyes using coloured pencils and solvent. The first thing I absolutely recommend you do before you start the drawing is to lighten up your sketch, so I'm using a kneaded eraser to lift some of that pencil off the paper that I sketched out the eyes with. This is just to make sure that the sketch is nice and light and that we don't get pencil lines showing through the drawing when it comes to the colouring process. Next, I'm taking the black polychromos pencil. I start by marking out all of the dark areas on the dog. So I like to mark out the pupil, the shape of the eye, any shadows in the eye, as well as some of that fur texture. So the dog is black, so I want to make sure that I do get in some of those fur clumps using the black pencil so that the fur is really dark and intense. I use this black pencil to give shape to the eyes, and I outline a lot of the highlights at this stage because it's really important that you preserve those really light areas early on so that when you use a solvent they aren't lost or blended into the surrounding areas. I keep the pencil shading really nice and light, and what's important is to just make sure that you don't apply too much coloured pencil or also not enough coloured pencil. So if you apply too much coloured pencil, the solvent won't work well because there will be no white paper grain for the solvent to fill into, and if you don't have enough pencil down, you will still have that really grainy feel to the drawing. So I filled in the pupil and created those shadowed areas with the black pencil, and I've also created that fur texture by using a light gentle pressure on the pencil and the pencil strokes to create that illusion of fur. In a minute, I will actually be increasing all of those values with the black pencil. So initially it's just marking everything out, and then what I like to do is add even more shading to all the areas, so the eyes and the fur, and I do this to just add more pencil value down to the paper to aid with the blending. Also, right now I've just focused mainly on getting in all the specific details. So like with the fur, all I've really done is just get in the main direction of the fur. So I've marked out where the fur is positioned, which direction it's going in, the length of the fur and the individual strands of fur. So I'll be building up the fur texture and fur clumps with the black pencil to just add more saturation and value to those areas. So now it is time to really hype up all of those values using the black pencil and just go over everything just to make sure that when I use the solvent, those areas really pop and stand out. So when you start blending, what you will see is just how saturated and intense those colours become. So especially the black. So for any areas that are really dark, I just like to go over those areas with the black pencil just to make sure that they are going to be really intense when I use the solvent. But at the same time, I'm not applying loads and loads of pressure on the pencil because, like I said, when you use a solvent, the black will just become really intense and even more saturated anyway. I'm just mainly adding in that shading and dark value so the black really comes forward when I apply the solvent. Plus, I'm also thickening up some of that fur growth by going back over the sections of fur and adding to the fur I already had. So for thicker, more clumped together fur, I like to use a lot of pencil strokes really close together to just darken and thicken up that fur. And for the more sparse fur, I don't really apply too much pencil to those areas. It's also really important just to make sure that you add in other colours to the eyes and the fur. So for the eyes, I spent some time really looking at all the tones and hues I could see in the reference photo. So I used a lot of warm, rich and earthy tones in the eyes, and I shaded those values into the eyes, and what you'll see is just how those colours are going to transform when I apply the solvent. I also added some different colours to the fur as well, so when I blend it's not just black pencil, there will be other tones in the fur as well, just to increase that realistic and that natural look. So now it is time for the blending. I'm using 3 different sized paintbrushes for this technique. I'm using a small detailed brush in a size 4, and then an aquafine paintbrush by De La Rowney in a size 7, and a larger sable rounded brush head by De La Rowney in a size 20. So different sizes just for different parts of the dog. I first start by blending the eyes using this small size 4 detailed brush, and to blend I apply a moderate amount of solvent to the paintbrush and I use circular motions to blend out the eyes. So it's really important just to make sure that you don't wet your paper too much. So if you get the paper too wet, it could risk damaging the tooth of the paper. So just make sure that your paintbrush isn't too wet, and always dab off any excess solvent onto a piece of kitchen roll or tissue paper, and also make sure that you do ventilate your room as well. I like to use a bit more solvent for the first layer of blending, and then if I blend out any more layers after this, I'll just use less and less solvent for each layer. So this again is just to make sure that I don't damage the paper. I am also using the Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper for this drawing. So it's a great paper to use because it's hot pressed, so it's fairly smooth, but it still has a bit of grain and tooth to the paper for that solvent to soak into. And it's also very thick, so it's 140 pounds or 300 GSM. Also, because it's a watercolour paper, it is perfectly suited for a wet medium too. I just blend everything out using the paintbrushes, and I would recommend that you wait at least 20 to 30 minutes for that solvent to dry. So your paper should be dry to the touch, and you want to make sure it is completely dry, because if it's still wet and then you use coloured pencils on wet paper, you could tear the paper. Now what I am doing is, again, I'm going in with the coloured pencils and I'm rendering this eye and fur study. So I personally like to start with the eyes first, and the reason why I love using a solvent is because it's just so easy to use coloured pencils over the top of the solvent, and it's just such a quick process just to render everything. So a solvent also saves on pencil usage. So because the solvent has done most of the blending, you don't have to add as much pencil, and it's also so easy to just go back over areas. So a solvent is also great because you can do that, and then you can also overlay some lighter colours over the areas that you blended out. So I just start with the eyes and I just intensify all of the tones and hues in the eyes by going back in with the coloured pencils I used initially. But the difference is I'm now applying quite a bit of pressure and burnishing all of those colours into each other. So the eyes were very glossy and glassy, so to create that look I've made sure to increase those highlights in the centre of the eye and overlay some of the white luminance pencil to really intensify those highlights even more. And I've also used some of the white pencil in the centre of the eye to create that really milky film in the iris. So that just creates that beautiful reflective eye, and I do this technique for both the eyes just to make them symmetrical and really stand out. It's time to work on the fur around the eyes, and what I like to do is look at all of the shadows, shapes and fur texture I've created with the solvent. So I look at where all the shadowed areas are, where the light source is, where the darker clumps of fur is, and I just work in and around those areas to create even more detailed and realistic fur texture. So above the dog's eyes I create that highlighted section of fur on the eyelid, and I just make sure that all the fur transitions really smoothly and softly into each other and all the surrounding fur. So I increase all the values in the darker patches of fur just using the black pencil, but I also make sure that I include some other colours into the fur so that it doesn't look flat. So for the lighter parts of the fur above the dog's eye and under the dog's eye, I just slightly altered the tones in the fur by using lighter coloured pencils just to add a bit more pencil value down and tone in the fur. I used the cold grey one mainly for those highlighted sections of fur, but I made sure to transition those lighter clumps of fur into the darker parts of the fur as well. With the pencil strokes, to create the illusion of fur growth and fur position, I created that length to the fur by using moderate to long pencil strokes for the longer sections of fur and short pencil strokes for the shorter fur on the dog. I also clumped some areas of the fur closer together by just building up more value and filling in any bare areas to just imitate that thicker fur. Again, for the fur that is more sparse and thinner, I just used less pencil strokes in those areas to show less fur growth, and after I'd rendered the left part of the dog's face, I started working on the centre part of the dog's face before moving on to the right side of the dog's face. So I did this to prevent smudging and just ruining the drawing, because a lot of pigment does come up after you have used a solvent. Now I am working on the right side of the dog's face, and I'm really just following the same techniques and processes for the fur. So I just build up on all of the fur texture and intensifying all of the shadows and darker sections of fur, and then I create lighter sections of fur just by pulling up some highlights. For those highlighted sections of fur, I mainly use the white luminance pencil. So I use this pencil because in my opinion it is far superior to the white polychromos pencil, so it's very opaque and it really stands up well against those darker colours, and it's just great for those really strong highlights or to create specific fur detailing. I make sure the pencil is nice and sharp so that I can really create those individual strands of fur, and the sharper the pencil the better, because if it's too thick, any detailing lines you're trying to create will become thick and fuzzy. I also do a bit of colour glazing as well, and this really is to just adapt on all those lovely hues in the fur. For the glazing, I'm using the sky blue, violet and the light red violet, and this is because the dog had some cooler undertones in the fur, so those hints of blue and magenta, and by glazing these colours in, it just adds to that realistic feel of the fur. So we are just about finished with this tutorial now, and I really do hope that you did enjoy this one. I would actually be really interested to know which method you prefer for drawing. So do you prefer the layering and burnishing technique, or do you prefer using a solvent? Or is there another method or medium that you like better than those? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, this is part of a real-time tutorial over on Patreon, so I have the full tutorial of this with narration and voiceover on Patreon. The link to my Patreon account is in the description box down below, so do go and check that out if you'd like to. If you are new around here, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell icon on so you never miss an update from me. You can look forward to loads of arty content here each week, so don't forget to subscribe to the tribe. But anyway guys, I will look forward to seeing you all in my next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!